Before the sun could even decide to show up, the valley still held that deep blue cold that belongs to night. The kind of cold that settles into timber, into window glass, into old bones. Inside the cabin, the porch boards gave a soft click as the wood contracted like the house clearing its throat. Martha Reynolds woke up to a sound she hadn't heard in years. Not wind, not branches, not the shuffle of some animal passing through. This was softer than that. Hesitant, like a fingertip touching a memory. Scratch, pause, scratch, right at the bottom of her front door. Martha stayed still, breathing slow, listening. The river in the distance kept its steady hush. The wind combed through lodgepole pines like it had nothing to confess. The clock on her nightstand glowed 5:11. The coffee maker set for 6 was still quiet. Most mornings, that quiet felt like both a blessing and a burden. This morning, it felt like the whole place was holding its breath. Scratch, pause, scratch. She sat up. Her knees answered with the familiar ache, an old argument her body always made when she tried to move too quickly. 62, she muttered, and still stubborn. She pulled on a sweater and thick wool socks her sister mailed every Christmas, the way some families mailed love. The cabin smelled like cedar and cold air. As she stepped into the hallway, she passed the photographs black and white from another life. A rhino in Botswana, a sedated cheetah, her late husband in a hat too big for his head, grinning like a kid who'd gotten away with something. Martha didn't stop to look. Not because it hurt, because it made the cabin feel smaller. Scratch, pause, scratch. She clicked on the porch light. It cast a tired cone over the steps and the thin swirl of early spring flurries snow that sometimes visited the Montana foothills even when it had no business being there, this close to Yellowstone. Martha unlatched the chain and cracked the door. Cold air slid across her ankles like a blade. And there on the second porch board, the one that always creaked when Hank Pearson came by to borrow tools he never returned, sat a small animal with ears too big for his head, ribs too sharp, and eyes the color of a morning, still deciding whether to exist. For half a heartbeat, her brain reached for cougar because this country had them, and the mind grabs what it knows. But this wasn't one of those shy, slate-tailed ghosts that lived in the draws. The muzzle was broader. The paws were too heavy, and along the crown of his head was the faint dusting of something that hadn't grown in yet, like gold, waiting to become a mane. A lion. On her porch. In Montana. Neat as you please. Martha kept the door between them like a shield and let her eyes do the work her hands refused to do. No obvious bleeding. His coat was dull and muddied, and around his neck, faint but cruel, was a collar mark, a ring rubbed down to skin. Something had held him, and something had failed him. "You're a long way from home," she said low and steady, the way you speak to wild things and frightened horses. The cub tipped his head, as if the tone mattered more than the words. Then, slowly, he lifted one paw and set it on the threshold. Not pushing, not pleading, just resting there, like a child standing at the door of a church, waiting to be allowed inside. Every rule Martha had ever taught, every rule she'd lived by, from Nairobi to San Antonio, sat up in her mind and cleared its throat. Don't feed. Don't invite dependence. Don't make your human world the answer to a wild animal's terror. Somewhere in her memory, she could hear policy speaking in Ethan Cole's voice, patient, firm, ranger calm. "Call us. Keep distance. We'll handle it." Martha stepped back anyway, just enough that the smell of coffee grounds and lemon oil could slip through the crack in the door. "Hang on," she said, mostly to herself. She set a shallow metal bowl on the mat just inside, filled it with water, and slid it forward with her foot until it kissed the line where outside becomes inside. Water first. Always water. The cub leaned in and lapped without moving his feet, careful, almost delicate, not frantic, not greedy. That was the first thing that made Martha's stomach turn, because this cub wasn't behaving like something that had never known people. She took 3 ounces of leftover roast from the fridge plain, unseasoned, and cut it into pieces. Her hands moved on old instinct, the way they had in other places, with other animals, in other lives. She placed the meat on a baking sheet and slid it to the same line as the water, no farther. The cub ate slowly and neatly, pausing between bites like an animal that had learned how to make a meal last. When he finished, he sat back down and looked up at her, not begging, measuring. That was when Martha's hands began to shake. She closed the door, not hard, just enough to put wood between them, and dialed a number she could have dialed in the dark. Regional Dispatch. "This is Dr. Martha Reynolds, up on Bridger Cutoff," she said. "And she swallowed. "I've got a lion cub on my porch." A pause. The scratch of a pen on paper. "Ma'am, did you say lion like Africa lion?" "I know how it sounds," Martha said. "There's a collar mark. He's underweight, dehydrated, exhausted. Likely illegal possession. Stay inside, doctor. Don't touch it. Ranger Cole is closest." Martha hung up and went to the window. The cub had curled against the step, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. Snow dusted his whiskers. When he lifted his gaze, the porch light caught in his eyes and turned them into two small lanterns. Ethan called 12 minutes later. His voice had that careful cadence he used for neighbors in trouble, and tourists convinced a bison would charge their Subaru. "I'm 15 out," he said. "Stay put. Windows locked. No more feeding." "Copy," Martha said, "because old habits die last." She didn't mention the food had already stopped on its own. She didn't mention the silence on the porch felt like a church waiting for a hymn. Headlights swept the yard. Boots crunched the path. Then a knock, solid, certain, the knock of someone who belongs wherever there's trouble. Martha cracked the door. "Morning, Doc," Ethan said. His breath smoked in the air. He looked young in the way men look young until they take a bullet or a mortgage. He crouched low, never giving the animal his full height. "Well, I'll be." He breathed, not for show. "That's no catamount. Someone kept him," Martha said, "and didn't keep him well." Ethan's eyes went to the collar mark. "We've had rumors," he admitted. "Roadside menagerie off the highway. Never could nail it down." He pulled a folded sling from his pack and moved with the patient precision the job drilled into him. When he looped it under the cub's chest, the lion gave a small, unhappy groan but didn't fight. Together they lifted him into the crate, which suddenly looked too big for such a small life. "Thank you," Ethan said, meaning the call, the calm, the lack of panic. He latched the door and stood. Through the grate, the cub met Martha's eyes with a steady, troubling calm. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't relief. It was a question that hadn't found its words yet. "Do your best," Martha told Ethan. She didn't look away from the cub when she said it. "I always do," Ethan answered. And he meant it. They carried the crate to the truck. The door shut. Tail lights swung red across the snow. The yard exhaled. Inside, the coffee had gone cold. Martha stood at the window long after the headlights disappeared, her palm resting on the doorframe notch her husband carved there on a dare decades ago. She washed the little metal bowl and set it upside down to dry. She told herself she had done the right thing. She told herself someone else would take it from here. But some things, once seen, don't go quietly back into the dark. Less than an hour later, Martha realized the quiet didn't land where it used to. It hovered expectant like a door left on the latch. Just before the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the cabin fell into that bright stillness that belongs only to first light in high country. Martha set her empty cup in the sink and listened. Then, faint as breath, sure as promise, she heard it again. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. At the bottom of her front door, her heart missed a step. She moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. There he was, dusty, thinner than yesterday. Frost smudged along his back. No crate, no truck, no explanation. He had walked 10 miles of rough country frozen creek beds, coyote trails, fences. The edges of roads like distance didn't matter when the destination was a door. Martha cracked the door a hand's width. The cub didn't move. He blinked, head low, tail still balanced on the line between two worlds. There was a thin film of blood along one ear where a metal tag had rubbed him raw. "Oh, sweetheart," Martha whispered, and the old rule book in her mind flipped open to a blank page. She fetched water first, then warmed a small bowl of shredded chicken just enough to keep him from slipping away. He ate in silence, one paw inside, one paw out, as if he understood that stepping fully in would change something neither of them could name. When he finished, he lifted his head and looked at her. Animals look straight through years, straight through armor. Martha reached for the phone, thumb hovering over Ethan's number. It would be the lawful thing to do, the correct thing. But when she pressed call, the signal crackled and died. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, snuffing the towers. Even the radio spit static. Martha stood in the kitchen listening to sleet tick against the tin roof like impatient fingers. "All right then," she murmured. "We'll wait till it clears." Hours passed. She split wood, fed the fire, swept the entry, but every few minutes her eyes found the window. The cub stayed close to the porch, curled beneath the overhang. Once, Martha stepped outside and caught him chasing a loose leaf, in clumsy circles, tripping over his own paws. It made her laugh out loud, the sound startling both of them. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. By late afternoon, Ethan's truck ground up the hill, tires throwing slush. He stepped out into the wind, called her name, then froze when he saw the cub sitting in front of her boots. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "He came back," Martha replied. Ethan crouched, disbelief settling into worry. "You realize how far that is from the center? 10 miles, open country, highway. He shouldn't even be alive." "I think he followed the smell," Martha said. "Or the memory." Ethan shook his head. "I can't explain it." He pulled the crate from the truck bed. "We have to take him again. We can't let him learn that porches are pantries." "I know," Martha said, and she did. She knew it like she knew her own pulse. Ethan coaxed the cub gently. The cub didn't move. He looked at Ethan, then at Martha. No growl, no hiss, just a small, confused sound, half mew, half sigh. Martha crouched beside him and spoke quietly. "It's okay. You'll be safe." The words didn't fit, but the tone did. The cub brushed his shoulder against her knee and stepped into the crate, as if he trusted her voice more than any fence. Ethan latched the door, lifted the crate, set it in the truck bed. "We'll double the fencing," he promised. But his eyes didn't believe him. "Doc," he said, trying to sound half joking and failing, "I don't know what kind of magic you've got, but you'd better not feed it twice." After he left, Martha walked the yard, searching for tracks already filling with snow. Inside, the phone signal returned later, bars blinking like nothing had happened. Martha stared at the screen. She could have called to confirm the cub arrived. But some part of her didn't want to know. Knowing would close the door. That night, she dreamed of Africa heat shimmering over Savannah, her husband's laughter beside canvas tents, the scent of dust and acacia. A lion's roar rolled across the plain, not a threat, a greeting. When she woke, the cabin was dark and utterly still. Then, just before dawn, came that same sound, quiet and deliberate, like fate wearing soft shoes. Scratch, pause, scratch. Martha sat upright, heart stumbling. "No," she whispered, because she didn't know what else to say to a miracle that insisted on returning. She crossed the floor barefoot. Through the frost-blurred glass, she saw a shape waiting in the same place as before, smaller against the white, yet certain. He had come again. This time, Martha opened the door wide. Cold poured in. The cub took one step forward, then another, and stopped at the edge of the rug, soaked and crusted with ice. He looked up at her, and Martha saw herself reflected in those golden eyes, lonely, stubborn, still standing. "All right," she said softly, her voice breaking. "You win." She fetched a towel and knelt to dry him, hands trembling not from fear, but from the strange, fierce certainty that this wasn't an accident. When the fire crackled back to life, and the room filled with warmth, the cub stretched beside the hearth and sighed like a child who'd finally found a bed. Martha sat in her old rocker, watching the snow drift sideways past the window. The rules she'd lived by her whole career lined up in her head, clear and logical, then fell, one by one, like dominoes touched by a careless hand. There would be hell to pay. Forms. Questions. Men in uniforms. She'd deal with that later. For now, she let the quiet return. Outside, The storm softened into a steady whisper. Inside, the little lion breathed evenly, the rise and fall of his chest syncing with the rhythm of her own. Somewhere beyond the ridge, dawn gathered its light, but neither of them moved to greet it. They had already found what they'd been waiting for. Weeks passed, and the truth settled into the cabin like a second weather. Ethan came by every few days. He kept it professional, but something in his voice changed caution wrapped in respect. "You're turning your yard into a classroom," he told her once, leaning against a post while the cub gnawed a strip of rawhide. "If he keeps learning at this pace, he'll outsmart both of us." "That's the point," Martha said. "He needs to know how to survive." She stopped feeding on the porch. Food was hidden, hung from branches, tucked in hollow logs, buried under rocks. He had to climb. He had to dig. He had to work. At first, he was clumsy, long legs, misjudged leaps. But he learned fast. Martha found herself talking as she worked, narrating, not because he understood the words, but because her own loneliness understood the sound of a voice. One afternoon, she watched him chase a butterfly that had no business being out that early. He pounced, missed, and landed in mud. When he looked up, startled, almost embarrassed, Martha laughed, honest and full. "You're all sunlight in trouble," she said. Then she tilted her head, as if the name had been waiting in the air. "How about Leo?" she murmured. "Because you've got the sun in your eyes." The cub's ears twitched at the sound. The name stuck. Then Lily arrived 16, freckles, headphones, a camera slung around her neck. When she saw the golden blur in the enclosure, she froze. "Aunt Martha," she whispered. "Is that a—" "No," Martha said quickly. "A secret, and he is not a pet." Lily pressed close to the fence anyway, eyes wide. "He's beautiful." 10 days of Lily meant music in the cabin again, soft guitar lines, the low hum of a teenager's voice. Martha hadn't realized how much she'd missed the sound of life. But secrets don't sleep long in small country. One afternoon, a truck slowed near the driveway. Hank Pearson stepped out, big man, suspicion in his face, wind and years carved into him. "Afternoon, Doc," he said, eyes narrowing. "Heard some strange noises out this way." "Just my bad singing," Martha replied lightly. Hank didn't smile. He walked to the fence. And when Leo appeared head low, shoulders rippling under the sun, Hank's face changed. "That's not funny," he snapped. "You've got a damn lion." "He's monitored," Martha said. "The rangers know." "Monitored doesn't mean safe," Hank shot back. "I've got grandkids out here. If that thing gets loose, you'll be explaining it to a coroner." He turned to go, but not before throwing one last line like a stone. "You always thought you knew better than the rest of us. You can't outsmart nature." The words stung more than Martha expected. Leo pressed against the fence, ears flat, pupils wide. "Easy," Martha murmured. "He's gone." She didn't notice the latch hadn't settled. A gust of wind nudged the gate. It swung open just enough. Leo slipped through, silent and fast. Lily shouted from the porch. Leo was halfway across the yard, eyes locked on the trail of Hank's truck. Martha snatched a handful of meat from the cooler, lifted it high. "Leo, here!" He stopped, muscles quivering, tail lashing. Then he turned back, stalking toward her like choice fighting instinct. When he reached the porch, he pressed his head against her knee, a low rumble vibrating through her jeans. Martha felt the power in him coiled, growing, real. She reached down to steady him, and his tongue flicked out, rough as sandpaper, brushing her wrist. A small sting, a bead of blood. He pulled back immediately, making a sound that could have been apology. "It's all right," Martha whispered. "You didn't mean it." But the tremor in her chest didn't fade, because she understood something then. He was growing, and the world would notice. The summer storm came in the middle of the night, wind clawing shingles, rain lashing windows hard enough to shake the frames. Martha woke to thunder and that heavy feeling that comes before bad news. Leo was restless, pacing fast loops, claws scraping posts, a low rumble rising from deep in his chest. "It's just weather," Martha called through the window. But even as she said it, she knew he was hearing something else. A sharp mechanical pop split the night. Not thunder. Her blood went cold. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the downpour. The air smelled of ozone. And something darker. Burnt fuel, wet iron. Then another sound. A gunshot. Martha ran for the old shotgun her husband had left behind. She chambered a shell and fired into the air. The blast echoed down the valley, swallowed by thunder. In the flashlight beam, she saw them, 2 men in ponchos, one carrying a rifle, the other dragging a wheeled cage. They weren't rangers. They were the kind of men Martha had seen in other countries, men who measured life in dollars. "Stay inside, lady," one barked. "Ain't your business." "Like hell it isn't," Martha shouted back. The rifle lifted toward her. Then something golden hit the man like a thunderbolt. Leo, still young, still not fully grown, slammed into him. The rifle flew into the mud. The night became noise and movement, screams, metal, rain, bodies slipping in muck. The other man dropped the cage and ran. The first man fired wild shot ricocheting off a post. Leo pinned him down with a snarl that sounded like thunder itself. "Leo!" Martha screamed. "Enough!" For one terrifying second, she wasn't sure he'd hear her. Then Leo looked back, eyes blazing, chest heaving. Slowly, he stepped away, backing up, teeth bared but silent. The poacher scrambled up and fled into the trees. Headlights cut through the rain, Ethan's truck, racing up the hill. Ethan jumped out, scanning, breath clouding. What the hell happened? 2 men, Martha said, voice shaking. They came for him. He stopped them. Ethan's gaze landed on Leo, standing between Martha and the open field, like a promise. "We need to tranquilize him to patch that shoulder," Ethan said. "Don't," Martha said quickly. "He trusts me." Martha stepped forward with open hands, murmuring words that didn't matter except for their tone. Leo's growl softened into a low hum. She pressed a towel to the shallow wound. "It's just a scratch," she whispered. "You did good." By the time the fence was secured again, dawn was thinning the storm clouds. Ethan stood beside his truck, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "I'm supposed to report this," he said. "But if I tell them he jumped a fence to fight off armed men, they'll either call me a liar or they'll take him away for good." "Then don't tell that part," Martha said. "Tell them he startled intruders." "That's true enough." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You two are going to ruin my career." "Then you're welcome," Martha said. And somehow, despite everything, he almost smiled. After that night, something inside Martha shifted. She stopped feeding him close to the cabin. She hid the meat farther. She made him track, made him climb, made him choose the hard work of being wild. And slowly, painfully, she opened the gate more often. Not to let him out, to let him decide. Leo began roaming farther. First a few hundred yards, then over the ridge, then whole nights gone. Each time he returned, Martha felt relief, braided with grief. Because every return meant he still needed her, and every return also meant the thread was tightening. Then, one morning, the yard was empty. No paw prints, no shadow moving along the fence, no breath. Martha waited until noon before calling Ethan. "He's gone," she said. Ethan checked the signal. Tracker died near the northern ridge. Could have snapped off, could have slipped it, could have outgrown it. Martha swallowed hard. They walked the trails together. Found a tuft of mane snagged on a low branch. Found one deep print in mud near the creek. And then nothing. The forest closed around them, vast and secret. "That's what he's supposed to do," Ethan said. "Find space." "I know," Martha whispered. "I just thought I'd have more time." Autumn came. The porch stayed swept. The coffee stayed hot. The hope stayed tucked where it couldn't stab too sharply. And then, nearly 3 months later, Ethan drove up again. He looked older. The kind of tired you get from too many days in the field and too many questions you can't answer. "You might want to sit down," he said. Martha braced. "You found him?" "Not exactly," Ethan replied. "But we've seen tracks, big ones, near the northern ridge. He's moving with a female, healthy, confident. It's him." For a moment, Martha couldn't speak. "A female," she said softly. "He's not alone." "No," Ethan agreed. "He's doing what lions do, starting a life that doesn't include us." Martha smiled, faint, aching, proud. That's the point, she said. A while later, one evening, as the sun slid behind the ridge, Martha heard it low and rolling, stirring the air itself. Not close, but familiar. She stepped outside. Across the valley, two shapes emerged from the tree line, one large, one lean, moving side by side. The last light turned their coats into molten gold. Leo stopped halfway down the slope. The lioness beside him hesitated, tail swishing once in caution. Martha stayed still, hands at her sides. For a long moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, human and lion, past and present, a line nature had drawn and somehow, impossibly, been crossed. Leo took one step forward, then another. Then he stopped at the edge of the clearing no more than 50 yards away. Martha swallowed hard. "You found her," she whispered. "Good." Leo lifted his head and looked straight at her eyes, reflecting the dying light. Then he released a low sound. Not a roar. A greeting. Warmth moved through Martha like circulation returning to frozen fingers. "Go on," she said quietly. "She's waiting for you." Leo turned to the lioness, brushed his head against her shoulder, and together they moved toward the forest. At the edge of the trees, Leo paused and looked back once. The last rays caught his mane, setting it briefly on fire. Then he vanished into dusk. Martha stayed where she was, long after they were gone. For the first time, she didn't feel the urge to follow. Because love, she realized, isn't always holding on. Sometimes love is letting them go. Winter arrived on quiet feet. The kind of cold that makes pipes chime and snow squeak beneath your boots. Martha kept busy because busy was the only way the heart remembers. It's a muscle. She filed permits, took calls, built out 2 small paddocks with Ethan's help. Lily designed a simple logo, a bright sun with 2 soft paw prints at the center. Martha painted a sign and mounted it by the road. Leo's Haven Wildlife Rehabilitation. Word spread the way it always does out here, faster than truth can walk, and sometimes kinder than lies can run. A rancher brought a fawn with a busted leg. A kid from town showed up with a hawk tangled in baling twine. A woman cried over a fox caught in a snare. Martha took them all quiet, steady. No promises she couldn't keep. And then, one pale winter morning, she stepped onto the porch with coffee steaming in her hands and felt it before she saw it. A weight in the air, like a tide turning. Movement at the edge of the tree line. And then he was there. Full grown now, shoulders heavy with winter. Eyes still the same gold she'd named him for. Beside him moved a lioness, lean, watchful, every step a measured question. 2 small shapes tumbled at their flanks, cubs, all fuzz and curiosity, all paws too big for their bodies. Martha didn't move. She didn't dare. The lioness stopped short of the clearing. Leo kept coming until he stood at the bottom step close enough that Martha could have counted whiskers if counting hadn't felt like prayer. In his mouth, carried with the careful grip of a mother cat, was a pronghorn fawn, limp but blinking. Leo laid it on the porch with almost ceremonial care. Then he stepped back, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on Martha's face. Not hungry, not proud. Intent, as if he'd brought her a question he believed she could answer. "Oh, Leo," Martha breathed. Her hands were already doing what they'd been built to do, checking breath, heat, shock, pain. The front leg was twisted. The skin was scraped, but the eye was clear. No foam, no panic. Fixable. The kind of injury that yields to patience, a splint, and weeks of boredom. Behind Martha, Lily's bare feet slapped the floorboards, then stopped dead. "Aunt Martha," she whispered, voice thin as paper. "Is this real?" "It is," Martha said. "Go wake Ethan. Tell him to come quietly. Bring the small crate." Lily vanished. Martha worked by feel and memory, speaking softly as she moved, not to soothe herself, but to keep the air kind. The lioness stayed near the tree line, tail ticking, measuring intentions. The cubs wobbled, sat, wobbled again, staring at the world like it was too big to hold all at once. Leo stood between families, the one he'd made and the one he'd borrowed. A bridge built from choice. When the fawn was splinted and settled by the stove, Martha stepped back outside. Cold, bitter cheeks. Her eyes watered. Or Maybe that was something else. All set, she told him quietly. We'll give her a fighting chance. Leo stepped forward and bumped his forehead against her knee, gentle as gratitude can be. Then he turned to the lioness. For a moment, the four of them stood in the stillness. Woman in wool, great cat in winter light, his mate, and their cubs between. No camera could have kept it honest. Ethan arrived at a jog and stopped like a man walking into church. He took off his hat. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. After a long minute, Leo and the lioness turned toward the trees. At the edge of the timber, Leo looked back once. So did the lioness. Then they stepped into the shade and were gone, leaving the cubs' tiny comma-shaped prints that the sun would erase by noon. Inside, the cabin felt fuller, as if the walls had learned how to hold warmth. Days turned. The fawn healed. On a bright morning in January, Martha opened the pen and watched it go awkward at first, then finding the old grammar of 4 good legs and open field. Leo came again in late winter, without ceremony, once with a wounded goose. Another time with a raccoon caught in a snare. Sometimes alone, sometimes with his mate. Once with both cubs bold enough to bat the little bell by the door. Each visit carried the same lesson. When the world breaks, you bring it to the person who knows how to mend. Hank Pearson stopped by one afternoon with a cardboard box held like a confession. Inside was a barn cat with one eye swollen shut and a history you didn't ask about. Hank stood awkwardly at the sink while Martha cleaned and stitched. He cleared his throat. "Heard you've been fixing what strays can't fix themselves," he muttered. "Figured maybe people count sometimes too." On his way out, he paused on the threshold, looked at the old fence, and swallowed hard. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was wrong." He didn't say about what. Martha didn't make him. Spring returned in pale greens and quick birds. Aspen shook out their gold coins. The creek found its voice. The sign by the road weathered into something that looked like it had always belonged there. Leo's visit stretched out weeks between them, then a month. But the space he left behind never felt empty again. Purpose sat at the table with Martha now, took the third chair, and asked for more coffee in silence. One soft morning, thick with the first rain, Martha stood on the porch with her mug and let the damp air rise around her. Somewhere in the woods, a branch cracked, carried on a breeze that smelled like wet earth and new grass. It wasn't a summons. It was something better. Martha set her mug down and listened. No scratch at the door. She didn't need it. The door would be open when it had to be. She thought of the girl she'd been under African skies, the woman she'd been in Montana winters, and the strange grace that threaded through both lives, delivered by a creature who taught her that love without possession is still love. Maybe the best kind. Inside, Lily's sketch hung framed on the mantel. 2 soft paw prints inside a sun. Martha smiled at it. Then at the day. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lion paused on a rise and looked toward a small house that had once given him water and a name. He didn't label what he felt. Animals don't. He only knew this. It was a place where broken things could be made whole if they wanted to be. Martha finished her coffee and set the cup in the sink. There were stalls to muck, bandages to change, calls to return. Work, she'd learned, can be its own prayer when you do it for the living. As she moved through the small rooms that had somehow learned how to be wide, she felt the world settle into its rightful shape. A woman and her tasks. A lion and his territory, and the thread between them, not a chain. A line of light stretched across distance and time. Sometimes, on mornings when the porch boards are cool beneath her feet, Martha still remembers the sound, faint as a ghost, polite as a knock. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. She smiles, and without turning, she answers out loud to no one at all. "I'm here." And the day begins, sure as the sun lifting over the ridge, sure as a golden animal slipping through grass, sure as the truth that home is not a place you keep, it's a promise you keep keeping.